Larry Hausner here, the author of Save Baseball, a prescription for the major leagues. As always, you can pick up my book anywhere online, so order yourself a copy today. My guest today is former Major League pitcher Scott Karl, and Scott was drafted out of the University of Hawaii, spent 6 years in the major leagues with the Brewers, the Rockies, and the Angels. 54 wins to his credit. And for those of you who love that WAR statistic, 8.7. Scott was also a prominent subject for my book and has been gracious to spend some time with me today. Scott, great to see you. Thanks for joining me.
You got it, Larry. Anytime, buddy.
So that's all impressive. Big leaguers, 6 years, you got all these wins and a positive WAR. But I got to believe that when you look back at that resume, nothing compares to being my radio partner back in the Hawaii Winter Baseball League many moons ago.
That was the pinnacle of all things baseball for me. Absolutely.
I figured, Scott, I tell people about that time where I was coming off a season as the voice of the Rancho Cucamonga Quakes, went over to Hawaii, not knowing anybody, but excited about that opportunity to broadcast in that league, which was so much fun. And a lot of big leaguers came out of that league, as you well know. And I remember going into the office one day and seeing you there, not knowing who you were. I think you were doing some traveling secretary work for some of those players, and next thing you know, they're like, "Hey, this guy's going to be your color commentator," and I'm like, "Awesome, this is going to be great." And what I tell people, Scott, is I never learned more about pitching than I did that time spent with you that short season in Hawaii, and it was great to be able to learn from you what I thought I already knew, but apparently I didn't.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, I've always tried to be a student of the game and of my craft. You've seen my career. I wasn't the flamethrower. I didn't have anything that was, ungodly, untouchable. So I really just had to rely on perfecting my skills, on being as educated as possible about my own craft, about my opponents, about everything. And so I tried to, bring that to our booth, and I thought we had a really good pairing up there.
For sure, for sure. So you're still connected to the game. We chatted a week or two ago about this meeting and doing this video together, and you said that you were in Arizona, which I have moved to the Valley of the Sun just recently. So you were here with the Brewers fantasy camp, and I know it's not the first time. So tell me a little bit about the experience and what keeps bringing you back to that.
Yeah, so when my career was over, I kind of, I ended sort of on the dark side of baseball, meaning, it is a business. And for the beginning of my career, a lot of things kind of tended to fall my way. And at the end, there was a lot of, again, dark sides of the business that didn't work my way and kind of left a bad taste in my mouth. So when I left the game, I really kind of broke away from it for a while. And then after time and wounds healing and so forth, I really wanted to get back into it. And I had talked to a couple of my former teammates who were coaching the Brewers fantasy camp. And so I threw my hat in the ring with the organizer of it. And, he had quite a few people looking to do the same thing. And so I got put off for a couple of years. And then all of a sudden, 2020 came around and he said, "Hey, if you're still interested, I can get you a shot." And so I said, "Absolutely." I took it. And it was just the greatest experience to put the uniform back on, to see, some of my former colleagues, to see some other Brewers players I didn't play with, to be back at the Maryville facility. And then just to, I have two daughters who are volleyball players, so there's not a ton of baseball going on in my house. So just to be able to kind of, again, impart my knowledge and, the locker room stuff of baseball, to be able to shoot the breeze with guys, to be able to make fun of each other, to just kind of do what we do. And so it was super, super helpful for me, mentally to do that. And then, of course, COVID knocked us out of 21 and 22, but I got good feedback from the campers that, hey, he's really invested, he's engaged, he was a good coach, he was fun, blah blah blah. And so they asked me back, and so I did the 23, 24, and now we just wrapped up 25, and I'll do it as long as they'll have me.
That's pretty cool to hear. And That is an interesting story about that you had that bad taste in your mouth, but now you've kind of done the 180 and back in the game to this degree. Has it ever like piqued any interest to go deeper into the game? Coaching, front office type of things? Has it, or are you just happy where you're at in that space?
Well, I do. I love what I do. I'm a private wealth manager for folks, and I love that aspect of my life now. But yeah, there is a part of me. I think that I still study the game very well. I think I still know the finer nuances of pitching and of the strategy of baseball. And yeah, I think that comes out a lot when I'm at camp with, again, some of my colleagues and some of the campers. But that's probably something I should have maybe undertaken right after my career. There was some talk about maybe doing some analyst work or even doing some coaching work. But again, I just had that bad taste in my mouth from the way things had ended and some of the inner workings of some of the managerial staffs with a couple of different teams, and so I did. I walked away from it. Now, in hindsight, would I love to be on a coaching staff? Yeah. Can I offer a lot on the inside? I believe that I can, but I think there might have been too much of a gap. But never say never. If somebody were to call, I would absolutely love to entertain that conversation.
All right. Well, maybe that'll happen. That'll be good to kind of stay tuned for that. So, Scott, we talked for this book project, and just to refresh everybody's, recollection of what I was striving for was I was trying to come up with solutions to what the game was facing in terms of challenges with declining fan interest and attendance, and that's been going on quite a while. The conversations we had were just around the game today, how different it looks, and I remember you telling me, Larry, it's hard to watch the game at times because it just doesn't resemble the game that you knew or that you played in. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, it's funny. I'm on a text thread with all the coaches at fantasy camp, and we were just kind of talking about some of these issues. And there's probably three or four generations. There are guys that, were pitching for the Brewers back or playing for the Brewers back in the 70s or whatnot. So, full generation before me. And even they chimed in to say that, yeah, their game was even different than our game, which is different than today's game. But, for me, I try to think of myself as a purist in the sense of the way the game is played. So, people ask me, well, what do you think about the pitch clock? And I'm like, well, I certainly didn't need it. And most of the players I think in my generation didn't need it. We just kind of got up on the mound, took the sign and took off. And outside of maybe, Nomar Garcia Parra and his little ritual with his, batting gloves and whatnot, there weren't a lot of other guys that took a lot of time. So the pace of the game was the pace of the game. There wasn't a lot of downtime. The shift, like, I don't think the shift in and of itself was the problem. I just think that hitters had gotten so accustomed to being so pigeonholed to one side of the field that, heck, if I knew that somebody was going to hit the ball somewhere 95% of the time, I'd put all my players over there too. And that didn't really occur in my day. Like some of my teammates, Mark Loretta, Jeff Cirillo, these are guys that made a living hitting the ball to the opposite field gap. And so you had to play him straight up because you just didn't know where it was going to go. And Tony Gwynn was a master of hitting the ball where it was pitched, and Wade Boggs, and on and on and on. And you just don't see that now. Teams are willing to give you half the field and players still don't take it. And then, where's the hit and run? I can tell you as a pitcher, the most demoralizing feeling is when you get a guy on first base with no outs and you throw a routine ground ball to second base and you're just chalking it up to a pure double play and you turn around and the second baseman's not there. So instead of having nobody on and two outs, now I've got first and third with nobody out. And I did my job. I threw the ground ball, but that hit and run really created a problem for me. It's like all those little nuances, the sack bunt. Now, people say, well, the statistics, are saying that that's not the way to do things now, and maybe they're right. I'm not I'm not against, statistics and analytics and so forth, but I think like many things in life, when a needle is pinned too far one way, like it used to be, and somebody tries to make a change, the needle inevitably gets pinned too far the other way, which is kind of where I think we are now and why it's just a different game for me.
It's interesting that is so relevant to the conversation I had with Joe Madden for this project. And Joe
Hmm.
said, analytics, it's good information. It is good. It's
Yeah.
not the only thing to rely on. You see guys like Joe Madden and Buck Showalter. These guys spent a lot of time with me, Scott, on this project, and they're from that same generation of manager where unfortunately they're not in the game right now in the dugout. They were, but not now. They would love to be back. But they're basically being told what to do and who to put in the lineup. Could you imagine some of the managers of yesteryear, like Earl Weaver, Tommy Lasorda? Yeah, you're laughing because you know what I'm going to say. Billy Martin, these guys, would you imagine somebody going down to Tommy Lasorda's office and saying, Tommy, here's your lineup. And by the way, Scott can only go 3 innings tonight. I mean, could you imagine that?
No, that would never fly. Now, to add to that, though, I think that if those guys had been handed some statistical data that showed, like, hey, Scott does really well first time through the lineup, second time through the lineup, but third time through the lineups, the numbers start to change quite dramatically, then I don't think that they didn't strike me as the type of people that would invariably just not allow me to go the third time through the lineup, but I think that they would be cognizant of those numbers. And if something started to happen during that third time through, then they would probably be more interested in making a move than not making a move because the data supports it. But I think they're individual thinkers. They have a feel for the game, they have a feel for the flow of that particular game, and they're going to go with that and use the data as a backup. I think right now the data is driving the bus, and I think that that's not how it should be.
Hmm. So interesting, other changes in the game. This we've just seen. I recorded a video on this a couple of weeks ago. The Dodgers spending and spending like we've never seen before, and not really caring about the consequences of, a collective bargained tax threshold, right? I mean, they'll write $100 million check. They don't care. So I'm curious, kind of a twofold question, like, A, should we all hate the Dodgers? Because there's hate out there. See, I don't think so. I think that we should just say, everybody's playing by the same rules. Now they have a deeper pockets. But part two of that is these deferred contracts that we've seen them with Shohei and others. That's a creative strategy that other and any organization really could take on. So, what are your thoughts on the Dodgers just spending upwards of 400 million on a payroll and B, deferred contracts to make some of that happen?
Well, let's see. I've given it a little bit of thought, maybe not as deep as some others, but I can't hate on the Dodgers for what they're doing. Look, they have the money. They're not having to borrow to make payroll that the way the Padres did a couple of years ago, or even last year, whatever that was. As far as the deferred contracts, I mean, that's kind of been out there. I mean, Bobby Bonilla is like sort of the godfather of having done that. Um, so it's like, hey, they've figured out how to make it work within their market, and you can't say that they're the only ones that are capable of doing it. Now, can they do it and Kansas City can't? Yeah, that's probably accurate. But LA or New York can do it. Boston can do it. Chicago can do it. But they don't, or they haven't figured it out. So it's hard to say. Look, if they can write $100 million, penalty check for going over the threshold, and still meet their numbers, and that's where people want to be, then they've figured out the right solution right now, and everyone kind of has to get on board. Now, it does create kind of a chasm between them and the Royals and the A's and the Twins and so forth of the world, and that requires a little more brain power than I've put forth towards it. But I can't hate on the Dodgers for figuring out the best method for their team to win.
We hear the cry from fans and those in the media, we need a salary cap in baseball. Now, that, as you well know, would be a really difficult thing to push through the Major League Baseball Players Association. But I think, and I write about it in my book, and it's not a unique idea that I came up with, but I think a spending floor might be a place to start because these teams, like the Pirates and the A's, they're benefiting from the Dodgers overspending, right? They're getting some of this money, but it doesn't appear that a lot of these teams are reinvesting it into the guys on the field. And as a fan of those teams, I wouldn't be particularly happy to know that my owner's just pocketing that money. I would like to see them reinvest it. So if there's a spending floor where every team has to spend $100 million, for example, I would think that major league players like yourself would be on board because that's going to put more money in the pockets of players. We can talk about a salary cap later, but let's try to get some parity. Let's get some spending on some teams that don't normally do it. When you hear that idea of a spending floor, I mean, tell me I'm crazy if you want, but I mean, what are your thoughts on it?
Well, I've never really looked at it from the angle of a spending floor. I'm with you in the sense that I don't think that they can get a salary cap through the Players Association. Um, I'm not even sure that they should. But I do believe, like you, that look, if you're going to receive a check from a team that's overspent, um, I don't necessarily think that you should just be pocketing that. Like that's meant to sort of raise all ships and bring a little bit more parity into the game. And I noticed that, when I was the player representative for the Brewers back in the late 90s, and we had conversations, and that's kind of when the luxury tax was being implemented. It did seem like what was happening is that, and again, I'm not trying to pick on Kansas City, but I think of them as one of the smaller market teams. Their viewpoint was like, well, I can take this extra luxury tax money and I can apply it and I can come in third and still miss the playoffs, or I can pocket it and come in fifth and still miss the playoffs, but now the money's in my pocket. And I think a lot of people kind of gravitated to that line of thinking. But I'm with you. I think that there should be a way that that needs to get back into the game, whether it's a payroll floor, whether it's adding to the retirement plans of, those players on those teams that aren't, reeling in those really large contracts of today. Perhaps that money gets put towards them for, monies for later on down the road.
Hmm.
Um, Again, I haven't applied enough brain power to it to try to solve this problem, but it is a problem. I agree with you. I mean, look, does it make it difficult for the fan to bring a family of four to the game? Yeah. I mean, it's like you start factoring in the ticket and you start factoring in the parking and the concessions and, the foam finger for the kid. I mean, it's an enormous amount of money. It really is. And it shouldn't be that way, but it's gone the way of the luxury boxes and the TV contracts and, the general day-to-day fan be damned kind of thing. And that's unfortunate. I wish it weren't that way.
Yeah, agreed. Because it is extremely expensive. I've got the data in the book. It's well over $100 for a family of four. An average family of four, cannot afford that on a consistent basis. Maybe go to one game a year, and that's not gonna drive interest if you can only go to one game a year with your family.
Yep.
You had talked about small markets. Now, Milwaukee, where you spent the bulk of your career, second smallest market behind Cincinnati, I believe. I spent a lot of time with their leadership. Um, they're doing it right, Scott. You played there a number of years. They draw between 2 and 3 million every year. They're a competitive team in a small market. What makes Milwaukee work, do you think? You played there long enough. You know the fan base. Why does it work there and not in other places that we've talked about?
Well, it's you have to remember though, when I played there, it was an entirely different atmosphere on many different levels, and I'll kind of bullet point a few of them. Number one, we played in Old County Stadium, outdoors, old, back to the Milwaukee Braves times and so forth. And our owner was Bud Selig, who pinched his pennies. There's no way around that. But now that was helpful to me in my career. Had I gone to it, I'd been drafted by a Dodgers or a Yankees or something like that, I might not have made the big leagues because when they needed something, they tended to go out and buy the best of what was ever available. Whereas Milwaukee, they really tried to develop from within because they didn't spend a lot of money in free agency. So that was to my benefit. I'm not knocking them whatsoever, but that was the way it was. And we would always be kind of competitive through June and whatnot. And then the trade deadline would come in, and the Indians and the White Sox would go out and get some good quality, players to plug some of their holes, and we wouldn't. And they would continue to climb, and we would just kind of fade away into the end of the season. So I feel like the town at the time had a bit more kind of blue collar, pessimistic feel to it. Um, and now that I've been back there many, many times over the last like 5 or 6 years, it's completely different. It's exploded in population. It's exploded in younger blood. It's just, I don't feel that level of pessimism that was there at the time. There's still plenty of blue collar jobs there, but there's also plenty of white collar jobs, and it just seems to be more thriving. Miller Park is a great place to watch the games. And I think when the ownership Antanasio came in, he brought with him a bit more of a spending mindset, and so I think he's found, or that management group has found kind of the right middle ground where they don't feel the need to spend like a Yankees, Dodgers, and so forth, but they're also not spending like the Brewers of yesteryears, and they've found the sweet spot of how to spend, how to develop, how to buy low and sell high and continue to do what you said, post 2 to 3 million people, um, get into the playoffs or very close to the playoffs and give people an exciting product throughout the entire year. And I can tell you that whether it's the campers I talk to at camp or whether it's when I'm in town during the summer, they do love those Brewers.
They do. Everybody's decked out in the gear, and they pack that place. I've been there numerous times as well. It is a spectacular place. It's an enormous,
Mhm.
enormous ballpark. I mean it, and you can see it way off in the distance as you're approaching it. It's a pretty spectacular place, and I know a lot of fans are like, "Well, it's not, it doesn't have a flavor of a Wrigley or a Fenway." I tell you, you know what? There's the energy in that building that you don't see in many places, and I like going there a lot. I really enjoy it. Um, Sadly, we lost one of the legends in baseball a couple of weeks ago, Mr. Baseball, Bob Uecker. And of course, as a Brewer, I'm sure you have recollection and stories about Bob. But when uh, when you look back on Bob's life and your relationship with him as a Brewer, what comes to mind?
Oh gosh, lots of things. I mean, Bob was as big, if not bigger, than the team itself. I mean, he personified the Brewers, the Midwest attitude. He had touched so many things in his own career, on and off the field, that it's funny. So we just again finished fantasy camp here a couple of weeks ago, and all the teams, there were eight teams that us coaches were coaching, and we all asked our players like, hey, let's in honor of you, let's pick a team name that personifies him. So our team name was the Front Row. We had a Mr. Belvedere. We had oh gosh, great taste, less filling. We had quite a few of them, and so it was a lot of fun for that. And then they asked us sort of at the sort of the opening ceremonies for the camp, like, can each one of the coaches, kind of, uh, give an anecdote of a Bob Uecker time. So I told of one where we were in Philly, and this has to be 98 or 99. I'm pretty sure it was 98, and we're there for July 4th. So it's Old Veterans Stadium down by the water, and the team hotel's like 20 minutes away, just in regular time. So I'm pitching, and I'm pitching against Kurt Schilling, and I ended up losing, but it was a pretty tight game, 2-1, 3-1, something like that. But so I'm disappointed that I lost, and I'm thinking back to all the different pitches I maybe could have done differently and whatnot. So I'm just kind of down and out. And then I come outside and I look around and there's like a bazillion people down there for the 4th of July. And I'm like, good God, we're never going to get back to the hotel. It's going to be 2 hours. So now I'm just getting more irritated. And so the buses show up and I get on kind of the media coach bus, whatever. And Yuke's always in the front seat. I mean, whether we're on the planes, on the buses, he's always in the front seat. So, anyways, we start to take off, and I notice all these police officers just milling around the bus, and I'm just thinking it's a security thing, whatever. So we take off, we start driving, we're literally creeping like 3 miles an hour and whatnot, just and all of a sudden you just see all these motorcycle cops go flying past the bus. And it turns out what they're doing is they're getting ahead of us. They're stopping all the cross traffic and they're just letting us haul ass through the red lights, green lights, whatever. And it's like a version of the movie Speed where our bus is going and we can't slow down or we're going to blow up. And so we're dodging barricades and there's cop motorcycles flying around us, blocking off streets, and Euchre is in the front seat, bare white knuckles onto the metal railing, and he's screaming at the bus driver to slow down, just going out of his mind. And of course, all of us in the back are like egging him on, like, let's go faster, faster. So we end up getting back to the hotel in like the regular 20 minutes it would have been. And Bob's white knuckled the whole way up front. And by the time I got back to the hotel, I didn't even remember losing the game. But that is one of the funnier ones I had with you. But then just, the regular him showing up in the locker room, he was so quick-witted. It was amazing. We watched some Johnny Carson clips in the locker room at fantasy camp with him, back in his younger days. But didn't matter. 30 years later with him in the locker room when I'm there playing and somebody would make a quip at him and he would have a return immediately that would have the whole locker room just dying laughing. So true icon, true epitome of the Brewers and baseball and certainly missed. I got the chance last summer in June I was in Milwaukee for a charity tournament that he'd been a big part of, and he made a quick appearance, and we had a good I hadn't seen him in 25 years, and we had a good 60 seconds of just one-on-one, face-to-face, catching up, and I really will remember that forever.
That's nice to hear. Scott, Bob Euchre was so unique. You mentioned Mr. Belvedere. A lot of fans don't know he was a legitimate actor and a good one.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and those times on the Johnny Carson show that you mentioned date back to the 70s when you and I were little kids. But in the 80s, when like I was in high school and we knew Bob Euchre was going, like my buddies and I, we knew Euchre was going to be on the Tonight Show. We would record it and we would watch it and talk about it. And at that time, he was no kid. He was probably in his 60s, but he had the ability to transcend generations, right? So you said he was bigger than the team. I've heard the same thing. I mean, he was 90 plus years old, but fans that are our kids' age knew him and loved him. And that's just what I think is so unique about Bob Euchre. And it's sad that we're losing these types of unique characters of our game. And I encourage people, if you haven't read his book, read it. I think I read it literally like in junior high school, and it still holds up today. So thanks for sharing that about Bob. Um, we just had the Hall of Fame elections, and I'm just curious of your take because obviously you played long enough. You played against some Hall of Famers, maybe even with a few. Um, and I talked before the elections and then after, and you may remember this part of one of the videos I talked about. The very first night of the Hawaii Winter Baseball League, we were in Hilo, the Honolulu team that you and I broadcast for, and Ichiro Suzuki was playing for them, and he went 4 for 4 that night, and I think he led the league in hitting. And he was just a kid. I think he was 18, 19 years old, and I figured, okay, he's going to be a slam dunk. Was a little surprised to see Sabathia being a first ballot. But my criteria, and you again can tell me like I'm way off base, but my criteria is when you say somebody's name, you immediately say that's a Hall of Famer. Ichiro Suzuki, no doubt. Um, and there's always guys that, we talk about every year that should be in or shouldn't they. When you think about the Hall of Famers that you played against and potentially with, I mean, who comes to mind as somebody that was just a slam dunk?
Well, I'd like to know the whoever it was that didn't vote for Ichiro. I mean, he got what, 99.7? I want to know who that point 0.3 guy is that didn't vote for him because I think that guy needs to re-examine himself. I mean, what Ichiro did just here in the US is worthy of 100%. Not to mention you tack on all the things he had done beforehand. I mean, could he, if he had started here from the get-go, surpassed Pete Rose's numbers? Yeah, potentially. And that's a number that I just can't ever imagine being broken. So that's a no-brainer. CC, I didn't really play against CC, so I didn't have any like direct interaction with him. I saw some highlights, I saw some numbers. They all looked to be outstanding. We were in the Brewers clubhouse and he had come over for that short stint with the Brewers and helped them into the playoffs. And a lot of guys really talked about his fire and how good of a teammate he was. And those are all things that obviously get factored into the equation. Do I think he was a first ballot kind of guy? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. I think there are some other guys that are out there that have some similar numbers, or maybe a little bit deficient in some areas, but then overly a little bit better in other areas. Like and I don't want to create a big mess here, but I've always wondered why Kurt Schilling isn't getting a little bit more look. I mean, the guy pitched for a long time. His playoff numbers are just off the charts good. Um, I know he's rubbed a lot of people the wrong way with some of his political espousings, and if that's what's keeping him out, I think that's a real shame. Because this, I know the Hall is a lot of things, but it's not a popularity contest of whether people liked you. Because I've heard stories and stories of stories about how many people didn't like Ty Cobb, but who's going to keep him out as being one of the best. So I want to make sure that everyone's kind of getting looked at on an equal playing field. Again, I'm not trying to take away from CC. I've heard so many good things about him, and he certainly did a lot of good things over a long career. But to circle back to your original comment, like yes, I think that when you say the word Hall of Fame, like, or you mention a player's name, it should just be an automatic like yay or nay. And I don't know if, for me personally, if his name is just an automatic yay. Um, and again, not trying to detract anything from what he
Sure.
did, because he certainly was an outstanding pitcher.
So, Scott, couple minutes left with you. Baseball statistics are so much fun to look at. So, I love going on Baseball Reference, and I did that. Obviously, I mean, no offense, but I don't have didn't have those stats like tattooed up here.
I'm
Uh,
shocked.
but one of the things I saw there, and I want to see A, is it true? And B, what do you remember about the slugging Scott Karl, who looked like you might have hit two home runs? Tell me about that record. I mean, yeah, great pitcher, but let's give you some credit at the plate.
Yeah, it's we did a little trivia thing at fantasy camp this year, and the guy hosting it asked me to, or asked all the coaches, "Hey, can you give me some things about you that other people may not know so that I can make it difficult for them to guess like who I'm talking about?" So one of the things I presented him was, I hit for the career cycle. And you wouldn't normally attribute that to a pitcher, um, especially one that's as slow as I am around the bases. Um, but yeah, I did. I got to hit for the career cycle, which was fun, and so the home runs. So backing up just a little bit, I had hit a ball in Colorado earlier in the season, a fly ball to center that was misplayed by the center fielder. So I think it ended up being like a hit and some errors and whatnot, but it went, pretty deep in center field. And Bill Schroeder, who was the TV guy, was giving me, he was ribbing me. He's like, "Hey, that was your best bolt." And I'm like, "No, I didn't really get all of that." And he's like, "Shut up, you're a pitcher. You don't know any better." So anyways, fast forward now to I'm back in Colorado, playing for the Brewers. Pedro Stasio's on the mound. He's already gotten a couple quick outs, and I'm thinking, you know what? He's just going to groove one here because he wants to get through this inning quickly. So I'm just going to get after it, and he threw it there, and I got it. I mean, I really got it. One of those, and if you've ever seen the video, the look on my face is like, holy cow! I didn't. That felt so good. And it went almost, they told me it went almost 400 feet. It landed, maybe 12, 13 rows back, right in the lap of these Air Force pilots who I practically traded my whole locker for to get that baseball back. And it was a great feeling. And I remember teasing Bill after the fact. I just walked up to him and said, that was my best bolt. And then turns out 5 days later, I'm getting a start back in Milwaukee, interleague against the Twins, and it's some rookie pitcher I don't recall. But if you remember Old County Stadium, it was really short down the lines and then got really extended out into the gaps in center field. And I hit this high pop fly down the right field line that just curled like one seat inside the line. So like 318-foot home run, ugly looking, but it was what it was. So yeah, those were the two home runs. And again, going back to the different games, I miss the pitcher hitting. Not because I felt like I was the integral part of the lineup or anything. I just loved the strategy of it. I loved being a part of it, putting down a sac bunt, moving the runner over so the next guy could drive him in. I liked, being able to hit and run. I got called on to do that a couple of times. I liked from the pitching side of it, the strategy of maybe not pitching to the 8 hitter and pitching to the 9 hitter. I just love those strategy pieces. But now that that's gone and they've implemented the DH across the board, that's never coming back, unfortunately.
That's interesting because, from a fan's perspective, hey, pitchers rarely hit 200, right? So fans will say it's an automatic out. But I've got to believe in your mind as a pitcher who is going to the plate, as they say, to help themselves, that really must feel like, hey, I can really help myself here with a bunt, sacrifice or just keeping the ball in play or having this pitcher work a little bit. I mean, so what's that mindset like when we used to say that, well, he's there to help himself. Like, what's going through your mind at that time?
Well, I mean, I think the fan's right. Statistically, I am kind of an automatic out. I mean, my best batting average is going to be maybe 200, 1 out of 5. Not so good back then, not so bad today's ball. But, it's like, to your point, I always wanted to come up with somebody on or early with no outs, or because I wanted to do those other things. I wanted to lay down the bunt. I wanted to do all those things. And then, flipping the coin there, if I was up, with 2 outs or there's nobody on or something, you're right. I wanted to try to extend the at bat as much as I could, make that pitcher throw as many pitches as he could. And my expectations weren't high. I didn't come up there thinking I'm going to get a hit every time, but I just didn't want to be an automatic out. I didn't want to not be able to help my team in some facet. So I really prided myself in giving it all that I had. And the first year I hit, I was atrocious. Even though I did get a hit, my statistics were terrible. I worked on it a lot. 99 was much better. 2000 had the potential to be a lot better, but the season just didn't go my way. But yeah, I miss that component. Again, I just think it's a more well-rounded game and more thinking to it.
Hmm. So, last thing, and I think it's also you're an answer to another trivia question. I believe you're the last Brewer to wear the number 42.
Mhm.
We know that Major League Baseball retired 42 across the board, but kind of, I believe, am I correct on that?
You are?
Okay. So can you take me back through like that time and how I guess they grandfathered it in and they let you keep it? Or like what happened during that time when Major League Baseball said, and you're like, wait, that's the number on my back.
Yeah, so I'll go a little bit before that. I'll try to do it quickly here. So I'm in AAA, and this lady came around the ballpark, and she was an artist, and she said, "Hey, I do these renditions for people. It's like a three-pronged art thing where I do a little bust, I do an action photo of you as a pitcher on the mound, and then like kind of a larger chest kind of photo in a big league uniform, hoping that you aspire and get to the big leagues." So my mom's birthday was coming up, and I'm like, I think she might like something like this. So I asked the lady to do one, and she said, "Okay, well, what big league number do you want?" And I thought, oh gosh, I didn't even think of it. So I called clubhouse guy at the time in Milwaukee and said, "Hey, if I'm ever lucky enough to get up, like what numbers might be available?" And he rattled off like five of them, and I said, "Okay, I'll choose 42." So I did the artwork, whatnot, and then turns out the next year I made it to big league spring training. I asked for that number 42, and then I made the big league club, and so I got the 42. And then fast forward going into '98 when Bud Selig, and MLB decided to retire 42 in perpetuity for everyone, but they did allow those of us that still had it to continue to wear it, and so I was honored to do so. And I think at that time there was maybe 9 or 10 of us. And then by the time I left baseball, there were three of us. There was myself, I believe, and Mo Vaughn, and then of course Mariano Rivera. So it was a huge, huge honor. I mean, I wish I could say that I chose 42 because of Jackie Robinson. I did not, but it was absolutely a true honor to have worn it. And I remember distinctly doing a radio broadcast after that announcement had been made again during the '98 season. And there were some people that were a little miffed that I didn't give the number up sort of as because I wasn't of, African American, blood, or, I should have done it in honor of Jackie. I should be giving it up. And, my only retort to that was that, that to me would be counterintuitive for everything that Jackie, believed in. His story wasn't about giving things up. It was about like, giving everything that you can and honoring it. So I thought that, that would go against what Jackie had fought for, me being forced to give something up. And so I said, you know what? I was very fortunate to be given this number, and I'm going to wear it with pride the whole way through. And I did. And I'm very proud to have, been one of the last few to wear that number.
And you wore it honorably, and I think that that's something he would probably appreciate, right?
Thank you. I appreciate that.
For sure. Scott, it's been great spending some time with you. I'd love to have you back. I think you mentioned earlier that you might have had an opportunity at one time to do some commentating, and you and I have that history way back when. I think you'd be great in a space like this, or on those telecasts. I think you've got a lot to offer, and I appreciate the insight. And thanks again for your time today. Appreciate it.
There, it's my pleasure, and I appreciate that feedback. And, never say never. If the opportunity arises, I'd be happy to look at it.
Outstanding. All right, fans. So, as always, please like, comment, subscribe, and share. And until the next time, for the love of the game, I'm Larry Hausner.